Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Matza, percussionist, drummer, and artistic director of Kosa Music, inviting you to join us in conversations with friends, artists, experts in the music world. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more of these conversations in the future. Today, I have a wonderful friend and great drummer, John Riley. Thank you, John, for joining us on this Shaping Your Journey. It's a great topic, and we can go on forever with this, especially for someone like you who has done so much. Before we get into the journey itself and the stories behind that, tell us a little bit about some of the people who may not know a little bit of your background.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Aldo, and I've always enjoyed being at the Kosa camp. So I hope all your listeners will check those camps out too. I grew up in New Jersey. My mother played piano for years and years. And when I was about 30 years old, she told me finally, I had hoped one of my kids would be a musician. But as I was growing up, she supported me and took me to drum lessons and let me buy music books and records and all of that stuff, but never really revealed that she had hoped one of her kids would be a musician. So that was kind of a nice, just family thing to be aware of. I started playing. I had a snare drum, and I would play that snare drum with the radio in the house. And I think I was making a lot of noise that wasn't that good. And my father said, well, if he's going to do that this much, he should take some lessons. And I mean, my original inspiration was seeing Ringo on TV. I think there's so many people, my generation, our generation, who kind of were excited. For me, it wasn't really the drumming. It was like just the excitement and the positive energy around the Beatles. And I was a kid and I wanted to be in that kind of environment. And music was the link.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so I started taking drum lessons with a fellow named Tom Secola, who at that time I was, I think, 8 or 9. And he was 19 and a student at the Manhattan School of Music. And one of his classmates was Steve Gadd, it turns out. And this guy, Tom Secola, was from a big Italian family, and he was the youngest kid, and all his brothers were musicians. And they were playing commercial gigs and weddings and stuff like that. And so, of course, I wanted to learn how to play like Ringo, but he wanted me to be able to do his job. So he taught me how to play a bossa nova and a cha-cha and a merengue and a waltz. And in addition to the first reading exercises and the rudiments using the Haskell Harr books. And I had weekly lessons. My mother took me to them. They were $3 a half an hour. And yeah. I mean, that's, early 60s. And he was a young guy. So he wasn't really like a unnamed teacher or anything like that. But I stayed with him for 5 or 6 years and eventually bought a vibraphone. He said, you need to start playing mallets. And so I went from New Jersey. My father took me into New York, and we went into this drum shop, Frank Ippolito's professional drum shop, where I ran into Papa Joe Jones, who was kind of living upstairs in that drum shop. It turns out that people like Mel Lewis and Billy Cobham and Tony Williams and a bunch of other people all taught out of this drum shop. When I eventually moved to New York after going to college, that would be a great place to hang out and see my idols. And it was the kind of place that if you were looking to buy a cymbal, they would say, well, who's your favorite drummer? And if you said, oh, for example, Jimmy Cobb, well, Jimmy Cobb comes in here, we'll have him pick out a ride cymbal for you. And he would pick out a cymbal and he would sign it. and then you would buy that cymbal. Or Tony Williams would do the same thing, or Billy Cobham or Mel Lewis. And it was a real kind of positive, tiny shop, but very friendly and very, very uh, pro people that were inspired and trying to get better. Really helpful. Um, so that's kind of like my beginning, playing in rock bands.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the professional drum shop and Frank Ippolito, because a lot of people went through that. Same thing with um, Frank's drum shop in Chicago was the same thing. But Frank in Ippolito, I bought my first set of congas there, and he was making those pedals with the chain pedals, right? So he made one for me at the time because I was coming every month to New York and studying with different people and meeting everybody because my original plan was to go to New York. And so I would meet, I mean, your story of Mel Lewis, of course, I was in there looking for a cymbal and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and he says, no, try this one. And it's Mel Lewis. Right. And I had planned to go see the band play that night, you know? So I said, what time do you guys play? So I said, well, let's choose the cymbals before you leave. So he helped me choose a ride cymbal. Yeah, and I mean, those of us who grew up in that kind of environment in the stores would be like the big hang, just like the record stores were also a big hang. I mean, we would go. There was a place here in Montreal that I would go and the people running the place, 'cause they knew I would buy 4 or 5 records. They said, "Well, check this one out. Check this one out." So I'd leave with, but before leaving, you'd have somebody else listening to others, and they'd say, "Oh, listen to this one. We all share stories, so we know what to buy next." Right? Same thing with the instruments. Beautiful.
Yeah, that's great. Um, I have one of those first chain pedals too. I don't know. Do you still have yours?
I have 2 of them. The old
And
Gretsch.
yeah, I have one that Mel Lewis. When I was a student at North Texas, Mel Lewis and Thad Jones came down as guest artists before I really knew who they were. And Mel left this pedal there. And it was one of the very first chain pedals. And you know that because the sprocket, if you look at most chain pedals now, the sprocket is kind of cut so that there's no teeth that will dig into the toe of your shoe. But the original one was a round sprocket. I think it was
Yes.
from a sewing machine or some kind of machine, and it had teeth all the way around. And I have one of those that would definitely eat up the toe of your shoe. At one point, I lent that pedal to JoJo, who, when he was doing his bass drum video, wanted to show these different generations of pedals. And so that particular pedal that came from Mel Lewis is in JoJo's foot technique video, which is a
Nice.
fantastic video, by the way.
Nice. Did you start doing sessions right away in New York? Or you studied out west somewhere in Texas, right?
I went to a school called, well, at the time it was called North Texas State University, and now it's called the University of North Texas. But I know you had Lou Marini on the show. He went to school there. Ed Soph went to school there. A lot of great, Lyle Mays, the piano player that was with Pat Metheny for years, was a student with me. A lot of great musicians came through that program. It was a a big music program with about 2,000 music majors.
Wow.
And
Wow.
when I was there, there were 150 drummers there.
Wow.
So it was a really strong community, kind of like we're discussing about at Frank Ippolito's or Frank in Chicago's drum shop. This community of 150 drummers was, you know, it was competitive, but everybody was supportive. And as we see with professionals, we really don't have any secrets. We will share what we know in hopes that you know, the next guy will take it a little further, and that'll inspire us to take it a little further.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and I don't see that kind of thing with a lot of other instruments.
No, that's really interesting that you say that. I mean, I see that all the time in any of our gatherings. The drummers will all come together, and I mean, I remember going to camps myself before we started the whole COSA camps thing. All the drummers and percussionists would be together all the time, and our hangs at our camps were the same because that's where we share everything. We say, "Oh, check this out," and in fact, it was Mark Juliana who was telling me the story of when he came to Cossack as a student, right? That you said, Mark, I want you to listen to something in my car. So you were parked beside the that little lake, and Mark was very descriptive. He says, I couldn't believe it. John Riley invites me to listen to these tapes he had in his car, and we were watching down at this little lake. There was somebody giving was Glenn Velez giving a class down there, a private lesson or practicing. I don't remember what. So it's interesting this whole sharing of information, not just information but knowledge, because the more you share, the more you feel good about it, and the more everybody gets better, and it increases the conversation, right?
Well, I think we all understand how challenging this stuff is. And we appreciate anyone who's digging into it as much as we are and want to, help them maybe understand something and they'll reciprocate in some other way. Um, so it's about, these camps are kind of like an incubator.
Yep.
And the more people that are in there, um, the faster everybody grows.
And
Yeah,
now
this
with the
drumming community is really special in that way.
yeah, and now I mean with the whole internet and being online, in some ways it makes certain things easier, but it's not the same as being in the same room. Uh, whatever number of people in a focused, everybody's focused on this one thing, and sharing it. I mean, Jimmy Cobb when he was at COSA, I remember specifically he would look at me and he said, "Aldo, I'm not really used to doing these things." I know. So I said, I'll help you." So I sat in the class and I asked him, just a simple question. I said, "In what was the main thing that you kept in mind when you were recording the album, kind of blue, with Miles Davis? What? Because when we listen to it, it sounds like you're not doing anything, but it's so timeless, and it was so amazing. What was the ride thing that just seems to be magic on that whole record?" So then you couldn't stop him. Then he was off to the races. Then he became, he totally opened up. Then he knew where he was going, and it just needed a little push. But talk about being in a room with somebody who, any of those people, and being at this proximity, right? And sharing that and learning from these guys. I mean, anybody who has done something has something to say and something to share. But the fountain, the size of that fountain of knowledge is amazing. And I'm sure you get to see that and have seen that through your whole time. From the time you studied at the college and then beyond. When you were studying there, what what was your goal at that point?
Well, that's an interesting story because my father, I mentioned my mother later on said she hoped one of her kids would be a musician. But my father, who I spoke to yesterday, he's 92, um, he wasn't sure about life as a musician. He was a businessman and he didn't know anyone that was a musician. So he didn't really know what that life was like and how to be successful in it, or even how to judge what success was. So he was trying to steer me to an occupation where he knew something, where he could assist me and make my life easier.
Sure.
He wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. And so he was testing me often on my commitment to this thing. And one of the agreements we made was that I would be a classical percussion major at school, because his feeling was that if I was a failed classical percussionist, that diploma would have more value at IBM than the diploma of a failed jazz musician. Now,
Im-
I don't think either diploma would have any value at IBM, but that was his logic. Okay, my kid wants to do this. I'm going to push him a little bit in the direction where I think it will help him. So anyway, I started out as a classical percussion major, and after my second year there, I mentioned there were 150 drummers there, and I was kind of at the bottom of the pile. I had certain I had really good hands, and I was an excellent snare drum reader, because I'd studied with Joe Morello. But
right.
my experience reading charts and playing in a big band was just zero. And that was the the ensemble in that school that got the heaviest players and did the best gigs was a big band. So having those kind of chart reading skills and being able to follow a conductor and all that stuff, I just didn't have that. So I was at the bottom of the pile. But I followed around the number one drummer in that school. And I went to every rehearsal that he did. His name was John Bryant. And I I learned a lot by observing the way he related to written music, a written chart, and the way he accompanied soloists and his time feeling. Um, and well, I'll take a little tangent. After my freshman year at school, I got a gig playing in an amusement park in Houston, Texas, called Astro World, which was next to the Astrodome. And the gig was playing with, I don't know, an 8 or 10 piece band, some kind of a Broadway type review. And I think they hired me because I was in this school in North Texas. But after my first day there, I got fired. I wasn't. I still hadn't had my chart reading stuff together. I wasn't that good at following a conductor, and I will tell you that disappointed me so much and pissed me off that I wasn't able to do the job. And that particular summer between my freshman and sophomore year in college, I was possessed in practicing 8, 10, 12 hours a day to kind of try and get better. And so I wouldn't have these deficiencies and this heartbreak again. And so I went back to school in the fall for my sophomore year. And I guess I sounded different because all my buddies said, "Man, what were you eating this summer? Because you sound like a different person." So then by the end of my sophomore year, they actually hired me to teach there. And that was, I'm not a genius, but the point of the story is that if you are exposed to the right stuff and you're hungry enough about it, you can make progress pretty fast. And um, so by the time they hired me to teach there, I was able to convince my father to let me change my degree from classical percussion to jazz. And so that's sort of this story of how I got there. Um, and then I finished school there. I played in this band they call the 1 o'clock Lab Band and graduated. Actually, I graduated a semester early, but stuck around because the band usually recorded in the spring. And I knew that there was going to be a tour uh, that the band was doing. So this was the summer of 1976, and this lab band was hired by the U.S. State Department to do a 5-week tour of Russia. And 1976 was the bicentennial of America.
That's right.
And somehow this college band got sent to Russia to represent America on the bicentennial. It was really bizarre, but it was a fantastic experience. It was really my first experience on the road, um, and traveling in that way. Um, so that's like a bunch of little stories wound together, but that's how I got to become a jazz major at school. Um, yeah,
And then some of the, I mean, I remember in the 1 o'clock band, Ed Soft played in that band too, right?
in the
Because I
60s, in
remember
the late 60s.
when I met him at the Jamie Ebersole camps that I used to go to as a kid, we became friends, and then I would see many different people in New York when I went there. But he came through when I was living. No, he came through once with the Woody Herman band, and they had just recorded the album. Um, oh, what's that
Giant
album?
Steps.
Giant Steps. That's right. They had just recorded it, and like I mean, he was amazing, and it's funny because the keyboard player, who we became good friends, gave me a copy, an advanced copy of a cassette, and I would go home and try to play it to this recording, and he says it's not mixed, but you'll get the idea. I can't remember his name, but Ed Soph was just so musical and so amazing. I mean, I was just in awe, and I was always in search of how to play like swing like that and fast also. At the same time, one of my teachers, because I was a rock drummer who then went to study classical percussion because I didn't read, so I went fast forward, in a different kind of avenue or a different trajectory. But my timpani teacher that was at the National Arts Center in Ottawa before I came to Montreal, he gave me this album and he said, "Listen to this," and it was Tony Williams' The Lifetime album, the black cover, and of course, I had I just had a meltdown because I couldn't figure anything out. So when the following week, he looked at me because he was a drummer himself, but he was an incredible timpanist. So he said, "What'd you think?" He says, "Man," I said, "that's incredible, all those overdubs. It sounds amazing." He says, "No, that's him playing. That's probably one take, and that's Tony Williams playing." And it was just beyond my comprehension. It was just a trio, right? It was organ, bass, and drums, right? If I remember
Right?
correctly.
Organ,
And
guitar, and drums.
oh,
Larry
guitar.
Young and
All
John
right.
McLaughlin.
I mean,
Yeah.
and then I said almost got discouraged. Oh, discouraged. I mean, I was just like looking at Mount Everest all the time. So I'm always looking up and I'm saying, how so then I made it my business to follow people and to study with people as much as I could, like to because I got you do it out of being scared. So if I fail, this is gonna hurt really bad, but I'd rather fail fast or get or get somewhere, because now you see it. It's you know and see
Yeah, that's the
players.
same thing I was talking about. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, or whatever, the facts are that when I was at North Texas was appeared when Ed was in New York. So I didn't have the good fortune of studying with him. But that particular record, Giant Steps, was kind of groundbreaking for me because I was kind of more familiar with Buddy Rich and Joe Morello and their way of playing. And Ed was playing in a big band, and I heard something that reminded me more of Roy Haynes. And so there was this just this whole other way of approaching music in an ensemble like that. I became aware of that through that recording. Um, yeah, Ed was a mentor to so many people. And I would say for me also, even though we never really had, I never took lessons from him, but just knowing that there was an Ed Soph um, gave me hope that I could do it too. You
Right,
know what I
right.
mean?
Yeah. No, and he was
Um,
great also he was a great communicator and a great teacher. When we did our video, instructional video uh, with Hudson Music, I said, just take one topic, and his whole topic was about you don't change hands, you just play differently on the cymbals. His whole um, topic was that and how you look at playing the cymbal a different way because you only have one hand to play that cymbal, and it was really interesting how he was able to communicate that. And these were short lessons that we did, and I always remember anything that he would explain, just like yourself. I mean, you're the same, that kind of communicator, where there's a whole logic in your process. So by the time you're finished speaking, the person really understands. And you're very much like that, John. By the way.
well, thanks. But he's special. Um, hey, you sent me a photograph from when I was at COSA some years ago, and just sort of following this topic of drummers supporting each other and being curious about different things. I think I told you in that photograph that the guy sitting in the front row is Jim Chapin, and to see someone like him attending workshops by someone that could be his grandchild, um, and participating and supporting and contributing to whatever I might have to say. That's just part of the same thing. We're all trying to grow together,
Yeah.
um, and I was grateful. I mean, for the opportunities that I had to hang out with him, and a couple of times it was at COSA.
Yeah, he was at COSA for a very long time, many years, to the very end actually, and he was actually supposed to appear in the video, and the doctors wouldn't let him come, so we beamed him in to talk on the phone and to address everybody, just because he had problems with his feet, he couldn't walk, and he was so much a part of the family. I mean, he was supporting everybody, and not just support. He'd really participate and correct if need be. I remember Bill Ludwig came. He was doing a presentation on the silent movies and the effects, and I have this video, by the way, because we archived everything. And so he got into this argument, well, a friendly argument with Bill. And because Bill made a statement about a certain year, and Jim would say, "Bill, that's not. I was there. That was 1932." And then they would get into a kind of an argument. No, what are you talking about? You old geezer, that was in 33, or whatever the detail was. But it was really interesting. So all of us are going like this and like that, and in disbelief, and just waiting to see where this was going. But just the interest that those guys had in and getting it out there and making sure you understood, and everybody getting it. That was the amazing part.
Yeah,
And I
that's the
thought it
way
was
it
important
is.
for you to have that photo because, I mean, Jim was a fan of a lot of good people, and he always loved to learn also, and just sit in, and he would make comments. He says that was interesting, what John said about, you know,
Yeah. Um, I've been around people that discouraged me, that showed me all my flaws, and that didn't make me a happy camper. or really inspire me to practice again. There's another way um, to get the information across. And what's that old saying? You catch more bees with honey than with vinegar. Catch
Yeah.
more flies with honey than with vinegar. And you might encounter somebody who actually is telling you something you need to know, but the way they deliver it is perhaps harsher than you're willing to accept. And I don't want to be like that. I want to give it whatever I can, however I can help somebody. I want it to be in a friendly and positive, and yes, I can do this. Let me go there now and try it. Like that kind of attitude, rather
Sure.
than saying, man, that sounds really stupid when you play a waltz with brushes. That doesn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's not helpful. No,
no, that's not helpful. But some people criticize in that way, and other people are equally critical, but they give you the information you need in a way that it inspires you to work on it rather than makes you want to sell your drums, you know?
yeah, no, no, for sure.
And
And
so, yeah, I'd much rather be around and be the kind of person that somehow gives someone hope rather than pulls the carpet out from under them.
right. Everybody feels so much better in that with that approach anyway, right?
Yeah.
I want to take you back a little bit. You were talking about Mel Lewis with the Thad Jones Mel Lewis band, and I remember seeing them many times at the Village Vanguard, right? They used to play there. And when Mel Lewis passed, you became a permanent part of the band because you were subbing for him.
I was subbing for him first. He would send me as a sub for other bands that he played in. Um, I subbed for him on a rehearsal with Benny Goodman. I subbed for him in a band that the pianist John Lewis ran. It was called the American Jazz Orchestra. Um, the first time I subbed for him in his band at the Vanguard, he had a family emergency. And I got the call like 10 minutes before the downbeat. And I ran down there, and they had begun. And the saxophone player, Joe Lovano, was playing the first tune. And then I played the rest of the night. And then Mel started calling me to sub for him there, as well as in other things. Yeah.
Because that was
Uh,
a special band to play in. It was not everybody who could play in that band, in that environment, or those charts.
well, I played there last night. We still play every Monday night at the Village Vanguard. Um,
So now it's called
it,
the
it,
Vanguard Orchestra, the same
yeah,
kind of.
it's the same book. I mean, the book is expanded, but the core of it is the Thad Jones music, and then Bob Brookmeyer music, music by Jim McNeely, by Bob Mincer, by Micah Benny. There's about 300 arrangements in the book.
Wow.
And it's kind of a strange thing to say, but I've been doing it longer than Mel Lewis did it.
Wow.
Yeah, wow, it's right. um, I've learned so much and been honored and privileged to be in the band. Um, and at first I was playing Mel's drums and Mel's cymbals in the club, and it felt to me like as I'd been there 2 or 3 years, the band began to trust me more, and I was able to. Mel's drums kind of started to deteriorate. Um, they were kept in fiber cases behind the stage at the Vanguard, and there's a pizza parlor upstairs, and the bathroom in the pizza parlor, the plumbing wasn't so good, and so those cases got wet, and then the drums started, the hardware started to rust, and the shells started to get weird. So I was able to replace them, and the drums actually went to Mel's grandson, which I don't know what happened with them after that. But before they went to his grandson, I took the calfskin heads off the drums because he was wanted to be a rock drummer, so he didn't have any interest in those things. And I have Mel's cymbals here
Wow. Wow.
because they were going to be destroyed.
Or played differently, right?
Yeah, actually, I have them in a bag right over here.
Too much. And they still sound good after all this time? Wow.
Um, well, the Chinese cymbal is incredible. The 21-inch ride cymbal still sounds really good at a certain volume level. Mel played pretty soft. Um, the hi-hat cymbals are so thin that when I was playing them for a while, but I had to replace them because I noticed that the bottom cymbal started to go like this from the weight of my foot on the pedal. And the crash cymbal, I would say that it's lost its temper. It's kind of gotten really, really stiff and rigid. So I wouldn't play that one anymore. And those cymbals, he was kind of a Zildjian guy and then a K Zildjian guy. And his K Zildjians were stolen from the Vanguard. And he replaced them with these cymbals that were made in Turkey by the K Zildjian people. I think they're called Zildjisler or Zildjisser or something like that. Um, and then the Zildjian family made them change that name, but the stamp is actually this other thing that almost looks like Zildjian, but and they look like old K's. So, but that company became Istanbul.
Ah,
Yeah. But there was this intermediate period.
interesting, interesting. And
Yeah.
you played also with Miles back then, back in the day.
Well, I did one project. Yeah. Um, Quincy Jones was the artistic director of the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland. And he'd been begging Miles to do a retrospective and play the music from Birth of the Cool and Sketches of Spain and those sort of larger ensemble pieces that that Miles had recorded in the late 50s and early 60s. And finally, Miles agreed to do that. And so the event was going to be in Switzerland, in Montreux. So the producer of the festival, Quincy was the artistic director, but the producer of the festival hired a Swiss piano player named George Gruntz to hire a band to play this music. And at that time, I was playing in George's band, as was Wallace Roney and Kenny Garrett, and it was a really great band. And so the music was written by Gil Evans. Gil Evans' wife controlled the parts, and she wouldn't allow the Swiss people to put this concert on unless they hired the remnants of the Gil Evans Orchestra, which was a big band that Gil had in New York before he passed away. So, a very strange story. Quincy decided, well, I don't know if I can ever make this thing better than the original, but now I've got these two bands that both the Swiss band that was hired and the Gil Evans band that was required in order to get the music. So I guess the only way I can make it better than the original is to make it twice as big, to have two people on every part. And
Wow.
so, yeah. And the drummer in the Gil Evans band was Kenwood Denard. So we get to Switzerland, and I was hired to play drums. I have my drums there. Kenwood was going to play percussion. but Quincy doesn't know me. And I get there, and suddenly Grady Tate is there. Grady was really kind of intimidated by the situation. He said, I had worked with Grady. He was an excellent singer, and I did a bunch of gigs with him as a singer. Um, and he came over to me and he said, yeah, you've got your drums here, man. You should do this gig. He said, I'm 59 years old, and now I have to work with this MF, and I'm scared. I'm intimidated by playing with Miles. And so I said, well, Quincy hired you, Grady. You have to play. Kenwood and I are going to play percussion, the parts that Buster Bailey and Elvin Jones played on the record. Um, so that's basically what happened. Grady played my drums and my cymbals. Kenwood and I played the percussion parts. Uh, we didn't know until the last minute if Miles was going to show up. We were rehearsing in Switzerland, and finally, the last night of rehearsal, right at 10 o'clock when we were supposed to quit, Miles kind of floated into the room. We knew he was in the hotel. He had this amazing leather suit on with all these weird dangles and giant sunglasses. And there's like 40, 50 people in the room. And Miles walks in, and I'm standing next to Grady. And he walks right past Quincy Jones and straight over to Grady Tate and gives him a huge bear hug. And he said, man, Kluk left me and he left you here, you swinging MF. And this smile came on Grady's face, like he was so relieved that Miles was accepting him. And that sort of broke the ice and made him feel more comfortable and play with more confidence. It was amazing to see that Miles had a sense of who the most important person was in the room, that being Grady, and I better make him feel comfortable. And so then we rehearsed in the afternoon the next day on the stage and played the gig. So my role was very minor, but it was an historic event, and it was great to see how it transpired.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's amazing that I mean, leaders in general know how to make the thing work at the end, right? And um, they know, even though I mean, Miles, I'm sure I never worked with him or I came close, but I always admired and always wondered with his genius how he was able to keep it going for so long and keep it together, at least from the artistic point of view. And I mean, what you just said is really interesting, and I think that's a lesson that I think we should all be learning is making sure that the right people take the proper place so that the thing works. And it's I guess it would be like taking what you do seriously and take less who you are seriously than what you do. You know what I'm saying? I think
Oh yeah,
that's what I'm taking away from what you just said, and it's true. At that moment, Miles is Miles, but if Grady's not, and the thing doesn't gel, doesn't, yeah,
yeah. The sad thing is that Miles passed away maybe 3 months later. And this was the only time in his career when he kind of did a retrospective. So looking at it from this perspective, I think he knew something about his days left, and that's why he agreed to do this retrospective. Um, he played great. He played really strong. He was happy to be there. Was joking around. Um, he had some difficulty singing the music, so they made giant parts for him. And at one point, he couldn't read this particular tune, so he called Wallace Roney out of the regular band and had him stand next to him. And Wallace would play the first two or three notes of the piece, and Miles would remember it immediately, and then jump in and continue. And so during the gig, whenever Miles was kind of in trouble, he would go like this, and Wallace Roney would take over, or he'd go like this, and Kenny Garrett would take over. And
Wow,
yeah, it was really, really nice.
beautiful. I mean,
There's
I
a
had
video
only
of that and a recording.
that was recorded.
Yeah, it was recorded, and there was a DVD came out, or actually a VHS tape came out at one point, and I think it's on DVD. You can definitely find it on YouTube somewhere.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I mean, Miles was always amazing. I mean, I had seen him the last time I saw him was when he was in Montreal. The whole time with his back to the audience, of course, and that whole bit. But what they were doing, there was so much space, and where those two notes he would play, you'd say that, wow, like it's the exact notes that you needed to know what the tune is or what he was saying, and it didn't take much. It's amazing. I mean, it didn't take
Well,
much. I mean, that was big thing to me. That's big thinking. Like the notes are this big, right?
and it took 50 years of experience, and the fact that everybody was looking to him um, to set the tone in the direction, and they would do everything they could to make whatever gesture he made uh, as strong and as rich as they could.
Beautiful, beautiful. Then the other kind of work that you've been doing in New York. I mean, you're teaching in Manhattan and several other universities and colleges. Although you're still doing a lot of playing. What are some of the other things that we may not know that kind of made you decide and continue in your own trajectory, in your own path?
Well, my dream by the time I was sort of halfway through college was I wanted to be Tony Williams or Jack DeJohnette. And I moved to New York with the idea that I was hoping to play in those kinds of ensembles with that kind of interactive music. Um, and I mean, that in a way, that's still my dream. But because I love that way of playing. Uh, but you never know what doors are going to open for you. And when I first moved to New York, I had a piece of paper with three names on it. And so I didn't really know anybody. But what I discovered was there were these ensembles that they referred to as rehearsal bands that were led by composers. And a lot of good horn players would do those rehearsal bands, even guys doing studio work, because there was some more creative input and expression available in those things rather than doing a Burger King commercial. And so often the ensembles were really strong, but they had difficulty finding a good drummer that could read, that was willing to schlep their drums on the subway for no money, with no gigs on the horizon, just so that a composer could hear their music. But because of the experience I had getting my reading together at North Texas and playing in the 1 o'clock lab band, um, I could handle those situations better than the people that were willing to do it. And what I learned very quickly was if I play in somebody's apartment in a trio or a quartet, um, I mean, for lack of a better way of saying this, I could make an impression on two or three other people. But if I did one of these rehearsal bands, I could make an impression on 10 or 15 more established guys in New York. And one of the bands I played in, Anthony Jackson often played in, Randy Brecker often played in. Um, and so that that training that I had in North Texas allowed me to function in those ensembles and then create some musical camaraderie and with these guys that were more established. So that kind of helped me um, get going in New York. Um, it's funny, a couple of weeks after I moved to New York, I got a call to join Woody Herman's band, who Ed Soph had been with. I didn't take the gig because I was so excited to be in New York. Um, about a year or so later, they called again, and I realized what I needed was more experience on the road and playing at a high level every night. And so in January of 1978, I replaced Jeff Hamilton with Woody Herman's band. And that was a fantastic experience. Joe Lovano was in the band. At that time, the bass player named Mark Johnson was playing in the
Wow.
band, and then later Jay Anderson. Um, yeah, it was a great band, and Woody was the least nostalgic 65-year-old I knew because he was 65 when I was 23 or something. Um, he, we did play two or three of his hits at the beginning of every gig, and then after that, there was new music or the music from that Giant Steps record. Or right prior to when I joined the band, they did a record with a long suite that Chick Corea wrote for the band, and also included a bunch of arrangements of Steely Dan tunes. So Woody was open to this kind of stuff, and we loved it. You know, we loved playing this combination of Woodchopper's Ball and Four Brothers and Early Autumn, and then the newer stuff. And Woody's band worked 50 weeks a year.
Wow.
People didn't have apartments. We lived on the bus, you know, and this was pre-cell phone days. So everybody had a pocket full of dimes at first, and then uh, telephone went up to a quarter. So now you got a pocket full of quarters, so you could call home whenever the band would stop. Um, yeah, it was a different time, and everybody had a cassette recorder on the bus and your own area. This was your seat, and your suitcase had to go in the area above your seat, and you couldn't infringe on anyone else's area. Um, it was really a trip, and it was kind of the tail end of the continuum of Count Basie and Duke Ellington and Maynard Ferguson and
Right.
all of those bands that had begun, you know, way earlier. Stan Kenton, Buddy Rich. Um,
Yeah, that whole big
yeah.
band on the road was amazing. Must have been amazing to
Oh,
travel
it
with
was
that.
great. It was great. And the most amazing thing was that Woody had been in a bad car accident before I joined the band. And he'd lost his teeth and had a bunch of broken bones and stuff, and was kind of like not in very good shape. He used to drive a Corvette behind the bus, but he fell asleep one night and went across the road and had the accident. So when I was on the band, he was riding the bus with us. So he was paying all the same dues that we were. You know, the stop at the McDonald's, that's the only stop, and no shower before the gig, and all of that kind of stuff. But when he walked on the stage, he became like a Hercules that unified this ensemble of 20-year-olds. Um, and he used to say, you know, these people here in Iowa, they've been waiting 3 weeks for us to come here, and they don't know what we went through to get here. So we owe it to them to give them everything we can. And his energy conveyed that to us. So it was a fantastic experience to try and live up to his expectation every night.
Sure. Oh, that's a great philosophy, and it's true. I mean, what you go through. I mean, you're giving and you're making somebody else's life much better by you being there, and putting them in this into other state of mind, right? And it's a responsibility. Of course, we as musicians, we want to play, we want to project, we want to share, but what they're getting on the other side is a whole other experience. You're taking them up to another place. So that's really interesting. That's a great story. I'm glad you shared that because it is important to think about what the other side, because everybody, it's got to work for everybody, right? And there are different parts to the equation, you know. And if we just, you know, subject our thoughts, our experiences onto these people who are they're supporting us or you, uh, that's not quite fair. We should be there in a neutral zone where we give and they receive and everybody receives and everybody goes to a different place for a moment, right?
Yeah, we want them to be engaged enough so that they forget that they have to go to the dentist in the morning. You know what I mean? We want to captivate their imagination so that clock time is suspended and daily worries are sort of washed away for the period of whatever that concert is. Almost
It's
like a Steven Spielberg movie where you're
yeah,
so engrossed that it feels like the movie was 5 minutes long, but actually it was 2 hours long.
yeah,
But you're just so engaged that you don't feel that passage of time.
beautiful. And that's so important because that taking ourselves off that grid for a minute, 'cause you're going to come back to it, like it or not, but you're in a much better head position to be able to handle it, and life goes on, and you make things better because everything affects everybody, and everybody affects everything, right?
Oh, I remember a story Elvin Jones told me. I asked him once, in the 5 years or whatever you were with John Coltrane, were there special nights? And he said, well, one time we finished in Chicago, we played 4 sets. And the next day we were opening in Philadelphia, and we drove from Chicago to Philadelphia. And in those days, these big cities had two newspapers. They had a morning newspaper and an evening newspaper. And you, the custom was that on the first night of a gig, you would play a matinee so that there'd be a good review in the evening paper that day, so that there would be an audience from the very first night of the run. So he said, we had the bass on the roof of the car and the drums in the trunk and the suitcases. And he said, I like to drive. And so he was driving, and Coltrane was sitting next to him with his saxophone out, but no mouthpiece, and practicing the whole way, like an 8 or 10 hour drive. And Jimmy Garrison and McCoy Tyner are asleep in the back seat. So they get to Philadelphia just in time to play for the matinee. And Elvin said they started to play, and it was obvious that Coltrane was having some trouble with his saxophone. A spring broke, or a pad came off, or something. And he said he was making some strange sounds. But after a couple of minutes, he figured out how to work around them, and they played. And he said, we really got into something. And he said, we finished that song, and Coltrane and everybody walked off the stage. And Alvin thought to himself, wow, we only played one song. And then he looked at his watch, and 3 hours had gone. And so that kind of, captivation and possession and engagement in something, that's like superhuman, what he was describing. But we're hoping to achieve something like that most of the time, and for the audience to experience something like that. Yeah,
Wow,
that was a great story.
wow, that's amazing, man.
Yeah.
I wonder if anybody recorded that or I mean, these kind of instances where you're totally captivated in a time capsule that hasn't moved in your mind. It's amazing. Wow, that's a trip.
Yeah.
What were some of the interesting moments for you? I mean, you've done a lot of work with different people, and you're constantly exploring and thinking, analyzing, teaching, playing. What were some of the stories that happened to you, or that you remember that were memorable in your career so far?
Well, there's a lot of memorable ones. I mean, when I was unsuccessful at Astro World, that's definitely memorable.
Yeah,
Kind
that'll
of on
do
the
it.
opposite side of that, it's a story I've told before, where I was in school and Dizzy Gillespie was playing in town, and Mickey Roker was playing drums with him. And I went down to hear them, and the doorman said, "Hey, you're John Riley. We've been trying to reach you because Mickey Roker's suddenly ill, and you have to play with Dizzy tonight." And Dizzy was the most welcoming, most supportive. He made it possible for the gig to be a success and for me not to look like a fool by quickly analyzing what I was capable of. And the way he did that was he would say, "Okay, I'd like to play this song. Do you know it?" And if I said, "I'm sorry, I don't know it," he said, "Well, it's in 12/8, whatever that means to you. You start it." And so he recognized that he could adjust whatever he played to whatever I put out, and that rather than somebody saying it's in 12/8 and then whatever you start with, and he turns around and says, "No, not like that." That wouldn't have been cool. It wouldn't have been any fun for him. It wouldn't have been great for the audience, and it wouldn't have been. It would have made me feel like crawling under a rock.
Yeah.
Um, so the experience of seeing the way he handled working with a young, inexperienced player and finding a way to have it be successful, that was a really nice experience to have.
But on the other hand, John, in that same light, obviously they wanted you there because they knew that you were an experienced and a musical player. And to me, it's there's this theme that I'm seeing, in many of these podcasts that I'm doing. Sometimes the conversation comes up with certain drummers would never be told what to play. And of course, after having seen Ringo Starr in that documentary, because my question was always, did anybody ever tell him what to play? If you listen to a song like Get Back, how did he come up with that part? Like somebody said, what about this or what about that? That's typically what would happen in a situation in a band. But when you saw that, I did not see that, and I asked a few other people, including Greg Bizinet. Uh, Nobody ever said anything. So you see this transition, and they're playing off of each other. Whatever people came up with, that's what happened. And I had the conversation with Denny Sywell with Paul McCartney, and I asked him that same question because you're saying exactly the same thing, John. When you respect the musicianship, and that person, of course, is there for a reason. So you may think you were the kind of the underdog, but still, there's a reason that you're there. And the fact that they don't tell you what to do really means something, which also elevates the music because then you give what you have and your creativity. You're not stumped and you're not just servicing. That's an interesting theme I'm seeing through a lot of this. In any great music and any great moments, hardly somebody's really told what to do. You just let it be. Sorry, I said let it be, but you know what I mean.
Well,
What do
I
you
think,
think?
ensembles have leaders, but often the best ensembles are the ones where the leader makes everyone feel like an equal contributor. And my experience has been that when the leader gives too much guidance, then people get confused and lose their ability to 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 find the most natural thing to do. Um, so if a band is more or less a band of equals, then we trust that I'm going to trust that you're going to give the best thing that you think is appropriate for this moment. And when we're all kind of in that zone, nothing needs to be discussed.
Yep. Yep. No,
And
I mean,
when
I
you
have that experience with my group repercussion when we would work like that. No one, I would never tell somebody what they should do. I let them push themselves, and they let somebody else and each other push themselves to make this what it should be. Unless there's a specific arrangement, one of us says, "I really want to hear this," or "This is what I have in mind. This is what I kind of my demo is," and just let's get close to this. But often that's when you let it go and let people's individual creativity fall in. I think that's most of the time you get better results, and everybody feels much better about it,
Yeah, if the
right?
band leader is too dictatorial, then the result is a foregone conclusion. But if the band leader lets everyone contribute what they think is best for the situation, then there's a possibility for something unexpected and some magic to happen. You
Yep.
know,
Yep.
uh, I remember a long time ago, I got hired by this film music composer named Michel Legrand, and he was a very strong personality. And so the I was hired for a 5 week tour that was going to be with a rhythm section that he would carry with him, and we'd do play with symphony orchestras, kind of pops concerts. So the first rehearsal is just the rhythm section. And the first song is this song of his called What Are You Doing the Rest of Your Life? Which is kind of a pop, bossa kind of groove. And so he sings this pickup, What are you doing the rest of your life? And I'm playing closed hi-hat cross stick. And we get about that far, and he stops playing and he looks at me and he says, John, you are killing my music. And I saw the whole tour evaporate in front of me. I wanted to crawl under the snare drum. He said, let's try it again. And he sings the pickup, and I play exactly the same thing, but I move my right hand from the hi-hat to the cymbal. And this smile came on his face. And it felt so stupid to me. Like, this guy's written 150 film scores. He's went to the Paris Conservatory with Boulez. He's conducted orchestras all over the world. Couldn't he just say, hey, John, I prefer this on the cymbal rather than the hi-hat? But there had to be this drama behind it, you know. Um, some people communicate uh, in a more fluid, sympathetic way than others. And that was one where luckily I guessed right the second time.
It's That's amazing. That's amazing. It's great stories, but the aesthetic comes in. Making the decision. Okay, how do I change this? And
Yeah.
very quickly. Nice, nice. And in I mean, we could go on forever in this conversation, but before we go, what would be some advice you would give to people who are shaping their journey or working on it? Because uh, the principles all remain the same. The time changes, the technology changes, the music changes, but the principles don't, right?
Well, I think the thing is to find the music you love and to learn as much about that as you can. Um, you know, if my teacher, one of my teachers, had said, "Well, I think there's more opportunities as an orchestral timpanist for you than as a drum set player. I want you to be a timpanist." if that wasn't in my heart, I was never going to become a good timpanist. So you want to find the thing that you love that thrills you the most, because that's the one you're going to put the most passion into, the most effort into. That's the one you're most curious about. So, my as a young person, you want to experience, you want to smell a lot of flowers, but then this idea that it's all good, I don't know about that. I think it is all good, but it's not all good for me. Some of it is touches me more than other stuff. And so a young player needs to, at some point, become a little discriminating. And this is the thing I love the most. I like that other stuff too. I tell you, once I was at Steve Smith's house and we're playing two drum sets, bass drum to bass drum. And at one point I asked him, Steve, what are you practicing? And he said, oh, I'm practicing three things. I'm practicing this thing, and it's a weird metric thing. And I wrote a song that so that I can play this, and I had to teach my band how to feel it. And then he had a second one, was the same story but a different shaped motive, and a third one, the same story but a different shaped motive. And then he asked me, what am I practicing? He asked me, what are you practicing? And I said, well, I'm practicing some Afro-Cuban stuff, and I'm practicing some odd time stuff, and I'm still working on my brush playing, and I'm working on some Garibaldi stuff, and I'm working on this, and I'm working on that. And he said, oh man, I don't have time for Afro-Cuban music. I'm focusing on American music and Indian music. And it was an interesting perspective for to see this guy have this narrow field, um, and I think it served him well. You know, um, so you want to smell all the flowers, but then figure out which one touches you the most, and then at some point maybe you have to think about reality. Where is a door? Where could a door open for you?
Right,
Um,
right.
and be a little bit practical and pragmatic in that area. But first, it's got to be the music that you love. Otherwise, because the rewards are modest. I mean, let's face it. Um, so if you're stuck playing music that you don't really love, and you're not making a living, if that was me, I'd be one of those guys you see sitting on the park bench with a quart of beer in a paper bag at 9 in the morning. And I don't want to be that guy. I don't want you to be that guy. So if the rewards are modest, you better be playing the music you love. Otherwise, um, it's no fun,
Yeah.
right?
It's that thing that you would definitely love to wake up in the morning to continue doing it or to get to. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I've practiced a lot of hours in my life, but I'm discovering things every day that aren't as comfortable as I'd like them to be, or things that I haven't considered at all, um, that I want to explore further. Um,
Yeah, and that I guess
that's what,
that's part of the curiosity part that you were referring to. I mean, how curious one is and how important it is to satisfy that curiosity.
yeah. At well, years and years ago, I hung out with Jack DeJohnette, and his enthusiasm for music is unbelievably infectious. And some years later, maybe I'm 40 years old now, and I'm talking to Jack, and I said, Jack, I think I finally figured out how to play. And his reaction was, you know what, man? I feel the same way. And in that moment, it made me feel about this big. But then I realized, well, that's why he sounds like he does, because he's not a caricature of himself. He's not a character. He's an explorer. of this music. And that's why he always sounds fresh and young and engaged. And so that's the mindset I think we want to have.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Very well said. And anyway, I really want to thank you, John. We could go for days, but and maybe we'll have to again. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for sharing. I mean, your trajectory, your thoughts on shaping your journey, and these are things that would make us think and take us where we want to go. I mean, it's the path that we choose, and paths and doors we go through, and as my brother once said, what are doors? Doors are places we go through to come from, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. And you choose that. Anyway, you have a great one, John, and to be continued.
Great to see you, Aldo. Anytime you want, happy to talk.
Yay. And thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you, everybody. Bye bye.